The Battle of Falkirk, fought between the forces of William Wallace of Scotland, shown here, and Edward Longshanks, Edward I, King of England. Wallace has achieved his great victory of Stirling Bridge, but his support in Scotland is actually kind of unsteady. The bishops increasingly viewed him as someone who'd gotten out of control. The aristocracy doesn't trust him. We're going to turn out with some reason. So actually his army is a bit smaller than it should be. You notice the Chiltern phalanx is smaller than it was at Stirling Bridge. He does have some archers, but Scottish archers, they can only shoot about half as far as English longbows, and with only about a third of the hitting power. And again, the aristocracy has provided some cavalry, but not as much as they may have. On the other hand, Edward I, Edward Longshanks, is called a very large army and a huge portion of heavy cavalry, which is far superior to Scottish cavalry. You notice they've got heavier armor, protection for the horses. The Scots have none of that. The men-at-arms, and of course the famous English longbows. As usually, it's knights, men-at-arms, and then the longbows bringing up the rear. The English army is actually in two columns. It's been cut in half by what's known as the West Quarter Burn, which is a big, huge swamp. And it forced Edward Longshanks to lead one column of his army, and the Earl of Norfolk to lead the other column of the army. Both armies advancing in the same order. Knights on horseback, men-at-arms, and then English longbows bringing up the rear. Although it's often said in Scottish history that tragedy so comes after triumph, as we can see, Falkirk does not go well for the Scots. The Battle of Falkirk is much more story, frankly, no offense to Mel Gibson and the legend of William Wallace, it's much more a story of William Wallace's self-inflicted wounds. This was a battle that did not have to be fought. Edward Longshanks' army had actually been running out of food, and he was retreating south. He was heading out of Scotland because he couldn't keep his army fed. And he was having trouble finding Wallace. And Wallace essentially could have won the battle without fighting it, except William Wallace, he was either unaware of the English supply problems or didn't care. Essentially sends Longshanks a letter, I'm here, near what's called the Calendar Wood, that's all these trees along here, come and get us. Edward Longshanks is like, oh, thank you very much, I'll be right there. So that's the first problem. This was a battle Wallace did not even have to fight. You can argue that he may have missed an opportunity to maybe have moved his army very quickly south against one column, maybe wipe it out, so he only had to fight half the English army at a time, winning by what's called defeating the army in detail, or eating it up by piecemeal. In other words, you fight one column, wipe it out, then you fight the other column. But I don't know how practical that would have been. Chilterns are not known for fast movement. We're going to see that. You don't have a lot of cavalry, and you would have been way out for the protection of the woods. So here we are. And by the way, Edward Longshanks is absolutely burning for revenge. He's furious about Stirling Bridge. He's furious he's had to come back from his war in France, to come back, and now he's got to fight this Scottish upstart. Don't forget, William Wallace is not a man of high rank. To put it in today's terms, he probably would have been an Air Force fighter pilot who suddenly got jumped to head of the Joint Chiefs. The aristocracy is uneasy with him, and actually the Scottish bishops don't like him much either. It's one of the reasons why the Chilterns are not quite as big as they might be, as the Scottish clergy isn't beating the drums to fill his ranks. So we'll see what happens here. But things, we're going to see that this battle doesn't go well for the Scots, and a lot of it, frankly, is Wallace's fault. And the Battle of Falkirk, July 22nd, 1298 is on. The two columns of Edward Longshanks and Bishop Dunham and the Earl of Norfolk are moving onto the field in relatively good order, except for the fact their knight vanguards, the front of the lines, have broken off and gone charging at the Scottish archers. This necessarily wasn't a bad idea. Wallace made a big mistake deploying his archers to the front of the line, thinking he could pick off some knights. Their range was short, their penetrating power wasn't very good, and the English knights just simply run them over and kill them. But as so often was the case, not only did the senior English commanders lose control of their knights, the knights have kept charging, and they're heading right in to the Scottish Schiltrons, which are tailor-made for a head-on cavalry charge. I mean, these knights are so full of themselves, they aren't even looking to go around the flank, they're just heading straight in. Well, you go straight in against Schiltrons, straight on cavalry charge with no infantry support, you're asking for it, and the English knights are about to get it. And don't forget, there's our famous English longbows, the one thing that actually works against these Schiltron/phalanx. There they are, at the back of the line. In the column, the question is going to be, is Edward Longshanks going to finally figure out that these are the soldiers he needs to use to win the battle? The Battle of Falkirk proceeds. The English knights, thinking after wiping out the small screen of Scottish archers, has gone along, charged headlong into the Scottish Schiltron or phalanx, and they've basically been completely annihilated. This is what the Schiltron was built for. To take a charge of heavily armored knights head on, the horses get gored, the knights get knocked off their horses, and it's a very bloody affair. Now, William Wallace, you might think at this point, seen here next to the good old Scottish flag, blue background, white X, you might think he'd be feeling pretty good about himself. I mean, yeah, they've lost the archers, but they've taken what supposedly should be a charge of England's best and absolutely annihilated it. But the fact that the knights got this close scares the Scottish aristocrats, who don't like Wallace, have questioned the wisdom of fighting this battle when Edward Longshanks was running away in the first place, and they've actually deserted. Now, in Braveheart, they were bought off. That's a little unclear. But the Scottish aristocracy did not like Wallace. They've been losing faith in him. The Scottish bishops have also basically deserted him, so his Schiltron phalanx isn't as big as it might have been. And so the Scots really are not doing terribly well. They've lost their screening and flanking force. Their archers are gone, and basically it's now just the Schiltrons. Edward Longshanks, on the other hand, shown here, is showing that why he has such a well-deserved reputation as a great battlefield commander. He's got control of his remaining knights. They're going to hold down the flanks. He's setting up his infantry, but look, and he's doing the same with the Duke of Norfolk, the Earl of Norfolk. He's doing the same at the other end, deploying the knights at the extreme flank, infantry. But look what both Norfolk and Edward are doing. They're moving their archers, famous English longbows, into the center. And they're going to be able to go head-on the Scottish phalanx. The Scottish phalanx, although it's great head-on, it does not move very quickly. And that weakness is going to become very evident. There also aren't enough of them. They can't cover their own flanks. But Wallace is going to come up with an interesting answer to that. Unfortunately, Edward Longshanks and the English longbows will have an even better answer. The Battle of Falkirk is approaching its tragic climax. Wallace realizes he can't hold a long straight line. So very cleverly he's broken up his Scottish phalanxes or Schiltrons into 4 circular formations. Now they can't be hit from the flanks or from behind, and you've got those nasty spears facing out in all directions. Wallace is basically saying, come and get me and I'll wipe you out. But Edward Longshanks does not have the most fearsome reputation as a tactical commander for nothing. His knights and his men-at-arms, they simply don't move. They're standing pat. Norfolk, the Bishop of Dunham, Edward Longshanks are not making any advances. Instead, the English longbows have been massed in the center. Now, these English longbows have a fearsome reputation in Europe, and for good reason. Not only is the actual bow about twice as long, it shoots 3 times as far and with twice as much hitting power. You get caught in a range of in a shower of longbows, it's basically tactical disaster. Wallace, seen here, he doesn't really realize this. Remember, the longbows couldn't get into the fight at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. But now here they are, front and center, and soon it's going to be loose the arrows and bye-bye Chilterns. Well, we now come to the end of the Battle of Falkirk. Longbow arrows are flying, and Scottish Chilterns / Phalanx warriors are dying. The Chilterns simply cannot move fast enough to go after the longbow archers, and even if they do, they get crushed from the flanks and the sides by the English knights and men-at-arms. That's the reason why Longshanks took to this particular formation. The Earl of Norfolk, the Bishop of Dunham, and Edward Longshanks have all their forces well in hand. Wallace has no choice but to break up the phalanx and run. A number of Scots will escape, but it's a total disaster, and it's a disaster of Wallace's own making. Longshanks had been withdrawing from Scotland. He was leaving. He couldn't feed his troops. By moving out into the open and essentially challenging Longshanks without any real plan or necessity, Wallace has brought this disaster upon himself. Longshanks will eventually pay up enough of a reward that Wallace will be turned over, and it's quite possible that people in the Scottish political leadership had a hand in it. He had really outlived his usefulness. For Scotland to avoid future disasters and to gain independence, it will need someone who can command the loyalty of all the Scottish clans to form Chiltern phalanxes, command the loyalty of the mounted aristocracy, which of course have already fled the battlefield, and the loyalty of the Scottish bishops and clergy, whose idea this whole war actually was. Right now, the English knights and men-at-arms, and in particular the English longbows, which could take Chilterns apart, hold the field, and it's their day. But if there's another Scottish leader who can hold Scottish nationalism, the people, the aristocracy, and the church together, Longshanks may find that his victory today is not quite as permanent as he thinks it is.